Welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of WORKOLOGY.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of WORKOLOGY.
An Italian study released last year showed that attractive women who sent photos with their resumes got called back 54% of the time, as opposed to the average callback rate of 30%. Another academic study found that CEOs were considered attractive. These folks had higher stock prices and received higher compensation levels. Does that mean that if people are unattractive, they should be a protected class? Sounds like research might be proving that they should. We have a number of laws that protect individuals in hiring, but should attractiveness or unattractiveness be a consideration in your diversity and inclusion programs? I watched an interesting DisruptHR talk that might convince you of otherwise. But first, I'd like to go ahead and thank our sponsor, Clear Company. Today I'm joined by Kathleen Brink. She's the VP of People at True Style Doors. Kathleen, welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast.
Thanks. I'm excited to be chatting with you.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. How did you get into HR and land where you are now?
Yeah, my career actually started as a teacher. I taught Head Start for several years, which is kind of a combination, if people aren't familiar with what Head Start is, it's a combination of preschool and a smattering of social work. When I was getting ready to have a family myself, I didn't think that I could do both successfully. And so I took a job as an office manager, and that was sort of the beginning of my foray into HR. So I would say it was unintentional and then became intentional because I really, really loved it. And so that was, probably 19 years ago. And my career has really just had a really great trajectory since then.
I came across several talks you gave on DisruptHR, including my favorite, which is called Is Ugly the Next Protected Class? Can you talk a little bit maybe about why you chose the topic?
Yeah, I was kind of watching, there's like a historical context to every piece of employment law, right? Whether that's the Americans with Disabilities Act or Title VII or like all of those things that HR professionals are aware of. And I was watching employment law just changes and morphs over time. And I started thinking, God, well, really the only thing that's left is, are you attractive or not attractive? And there's so many articles and research and scholarly work going on around attractive people are more successful. Taller people are more successful. And why is that? And if there's something there, then half tongue-in-cheek and half seriously, is this really where we're headed? And then when I started sort of unpacking that, and you find these other local legislative things that are more city-based at present, it seems like that's where interesting conversations that sometimes make people uncomfortable, and it seems interesting and fun at the same time.
What was it like to do a DisruptHR talk, maybe for those that are interested or maybe they've attended? I mean, were you scared? What was it like to get up on that stage?
I've done, I would say, 3.5. And half because one was like an HR improv. So I'd say it's a half because I had no preparation whatsoever. The other slides and didn't show them to me, and I had to just stand up on the stage and talk.
Wow.
For 5 minutes. The slides were progressing. It was super fun. But the first one I did, it was petrifying because, one, it's mostly scary because it's hard to deliver a compelling message in 5 minutes and really get a point. I did, which was the 5 rules of HR, or my 5 rules. I was pretty nervous. But then after that, it's actually the structure of it makes it easier to do. It seems daunting, but because the slides auto advance, they're like cue cards, right? As long as you practice and you're telling you what to say next, so you don't have the luxury of getting off track because you only have 5 minutes. So I think it's really fun.
Cool. Well, let's get back to the topic at hand, which is kind of inspired from your Disrupt HR talk, is ugly, the next protected class. And you mentioned an academic study, which I referenced at the beginning of the podcast, and we'll include a link to that study in the transcript of this podcast. Essentially, the researchers from the University of Wisconsin and Arkansas analyzed the facial attractiveness of 667 CEOs. They found that those with a higher attractiveness index score had better returns around things like job announcements and higher acquirer returns and acquisition announcements. They were just more popular. More people listened to them and wanted to hear what they have to say. I feel like society in general just loves attractive people. And why wouldn't they? Their faces are more symmetrical and they're easier to look at. How does this translate, you think, into our roles within HR and the people we support?
Gosh, I mean, I think it's so important for us to just be aware of, right? I think awareness is the start of just about anything. If you want to change a behavior, is admit that that thing is real in the first place. And so from a candidate perspective, whether that candidate's internal, and we're thinking about promotions, or they're external and applying for a job and interviewing for a job, just recognizing our own bias towards, things that are attractive and people that are attractive. And so if someone comes in, maybe like physically they're scarred, or, they have a glass with the other eye or whatever, like pick a thing. That awareness is so important, that we get out of our own head and really, it's easy to say like, well, I just focus on the skill and the background of the person and whatever, but your brain is always telling you stories, and you can't stop your brain from doing that, but you can certainly be aware of like that thing is happening in your head.
As I'm thinking about all these things that we're talking about, I think about ourselves too, and I wondered what you think about how we can maybe as individuals sort of help with that bias. I feel like so many of us are now over 40, including myself, and I wondered if you had any ideas or thoughts on how we can help managers maybe go beyond the surface, that skin deep, and really eliminate those biases with candidates' employee interactions.
Boy, hiring managers are in such a tough spot, and I think sometimes HR professionals are kind of really hard on hiring managers because we either think we believe that they slow the process down, or that they're, maybe too picky or whatever. And I think as a partner to the business and an integral part of the business, asking really deep questions about when a hiring manager either doesn't want to proceed with a candidate that appears to be really well qualified and fits the values of the organization. And I think that values piece is really, really important to me, that if we, if the values of an organization are real, then that should be guiding our decisions. And so I think asking hiring managers, if that's true of your organization, and hopefully it is, that asking hiring managers to think about that, and how would the person fit into the values of the company, and are the values of the organization driving this hiring decision outside of anything else, I think that's a good starting place.
I like that. I've just been thinking a lot about this because we're not getting any younger. We're all getting older, and so many of us are now over 40. We've had some different conversations on the podcast about discrimination and how it exists within the hiring process. And I was really just curious about your thoughts, because beauty is sometimes associated with age, which is a protected class.
Yeah, and then there's the gender thing, right? So men traditionally, or, in whatever way you want to look at it, men become silver foxes and become more attractive with age, and ruggedly handsome is a thing. No one has ever said, well, she's really ruggedly beautiful, right? That term does not come out of your mouth. And I think that drives us towards things like hair dye and Botox and those types of things. And feeling good about yourself and confidence is attractive. And those things can certainly be confidence builders. I mean, I put on makeup before I leave the house every day. You know, as women, I think aging is frankly a little more difficult because the expectation is a little different. Yeah, age is a real thing, and we all have a picture in our head of what we think attractive is, and you know, at least in this country, that comes from media of all types.
Well, you also mentioned in your DisruptHR talk that there are cities that have laws or ordinances designed to eliminate discrimination against those who are attractive. And a side note, we'll include some of those in the transcript of the podcast, but that includes San Francisco and the District of Columbia. What are your thoughts on these kind of protections for outward appearance?
I mean, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I think on one hand, it's really important. And on the other hand, like, who is the judge of what is attractive? I mean, I referenced that a little bit in kind of a joking manner. It's like, who is someone standing at the front door saying, oh, you're attractive or not attractive? Because we're all attracted to different things. I mean, my husband says all the time, like, there's a lid for every pot. And everyone, you know, there's a person out there for everyone, and it's just not going to be the same thing that I'm attracted to is not what you're attracted to. So I don't know how you go about, like, determining that, you know. And on the other hand, like, I do think it's important, like, everyone should have an equal shot at opportunity. And we, you know, it's interesting. You mentioned before the whole thing about, you know, the number of CEOs that are deemed to be attractive, and you used the word popular. And, you know, I think that our attractiveness from a very young age becomes a driver of our confidence and our behaviors and those types of things that allow for opportunity. Right? How do you show up at a job interview, and are you confident, and do you feel good about yourself? And you know, if you're deemed by the world to be attractive, and maybe your whole life you've been considered attractive, then of course, then you would have more confidence and be more successful as an adult. So I don't think it's this magical thing that happens when, you know, you're 18 or 21 or whatever and enter the workforce. Like, stuff was happening long before then that was inside of your head, and that story that we tell ourselves about ourselves becomes a piece of that puzzle as well.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast. Today we're talking with Kathleen Brink on Ugly as a Protected Class. A special thank you to our sponsor, Clear Company. For those of you who are interested in Kathleen's DisruptHR talk, we will be embedding it in the transcript of this podcast on workology.com.
Podcast support provided by Clear Company. Clear Company is a complete talent management platform used by human resources professionals to help them hire, retain, and engage A players with ease. Visit clearcompany.com to sign up for a free personalized demo.
An interesting note, Santa Cruz, California also has an ordinance that defines unlawful discrimination as including differential treatment based on not just someone's outward appearance, like in terms of like beauty, but also their height, weight, and other physical characteristics. And that's a relatively new thing in Santa Cruz.
Yeah, and morbidly obese as a medical condition, you know, has been protected under the ADA for a long, long time, but certainly not just, you know, maybe you have a body that's not shaped like everybody else's body, or, you know, you are short, or you're really tall for a woman. I have a niece that's over 6 feet tall, and she constantly will say, no, I'm 5'11" and 3/4, and she's clearly over 6 feet tall. But, you know, as a girl, you're not supposed to be that tall. Then that means what? That means you should probably be playing sports and not wanting to be a music teacher or whatever. It again goes back to like these stories that we've heard like all our lives, and then you start to tell yourself that story as well. So, I mean, I think it's fair. I think it's a shame that we have to legislate that kind of thing, that we have to legislate being kind to each other. Because I think unkind people are not going to be legaled into being kind.
I want to dive deeper beyond beauty and talk a little bit more about how companies can become more diverse and inclusive. So maybe talk to me about your experiences in this area as an HR executive.
Yeah, I think that the word diversity gets a little muddled because most people hear that word and they immediately think about protected classes. And so they think about appearance. They think about the color of your skin, your gender, your age, things like that. And I really prefer and encourage other executives and hiring managers to think about diversity of thought and diversity of background and what those types of things, diversity of thought and background and experience, bring to an organization. Because I don't want everybody to think and look like me. You know, I want people from all types of organizational backgrounds and those types of things to bring different ideas to the table, because that's how we get better. That in and of itself, when we start talking about, you know, does a job really require a 4-year degree? Because you close the door to innumerable candidates by requiring a 4-year degree. And so when you don't do that, guess what? You almost automatically increase your diversity of candidate flow, because people that wouldn't have applied for the job are now applying. And so you've automatically opened the door to a much more inclusive environment. You know, and if it comes down to it and the degree is the deal breaker, then so be it. But diversity to me really means, are we open to people that, yes, look different and think different and come from all walks of life?
So let's say that you're an HR manager or an HR executive at an organization. Where do you think that we should start? Does it come from the top down, or does it come from the bottom up, or somewhere in between? Or how do you think is the best approach to having a more diverse organization?
Yeah, I think it's a two-pronged approach. I think that certainly the executive team and leadership need to model the way and listen to diversity of thought, regardless of where that comes from within the organization. You know, executives and leadership don't do as much hiring as a mid-level manager or, you know, supervisor or whatever you call them. And so those folks, that part of an organization is a piece of diversity and inclusion, and how are they hiring and what are they considering to be a qualification or not a qualification. And so I do really believe that it's a two-pronged approach, that we can't just talk about, you know, diversity and inclusion at some executive level and not have that conversation also happen at the hiring manager level, where, you know, that's where the decisions are really being made. And I think the other piece aware of and gets beyond their own bias, right? I mean, if recruiter isn't going to present candidates that may be untraditional, then, you know, that's a problem as well.
Talk to me maybe something that you're working on right now, or that you're really proud of that you've just wrapped up as far as an initiative for your organization or the HR team.
Yeah, we have a few things that we're working on in the talent space that I think really address this topic that we're talking about. And so we have begun hiring people with a record, people with a criminal background. And, you know, we certainly want our people to be safe, but, you know, sometimes people make poor choices. And a job is, you know, and you want to talk about academic studies, there's tons and tons of academic studies that say that a really big piece of reducing recidivism is a job. And so giving people that opportunity, we work with local halfway houses and trying to employ those folks so that they can re-engage with society and sort of build up a different kind of network than they've probably had before. that's one thing that we do. We work with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless and try and help put those folks to work. And then the third thing that we're doing is we're working with an organization called CareerWise Colorado, who, in full disclosure, I used to work with and helped get that nonprofit off of the ground. And so that organization builds in-business apprenticeships for high school students.
Awesome.
So sort of getting, and this is beyond the trades. I mean, the trades are certainly incredibly important for this country and certainly in the Denver market because we are in a building boom. But the CareerWise program gets students into tech jobs, advanced manufacturing jobs, accounting, HR, healthcare, and it really fills your pipeline of talent. And, you know, what it does for a community and for the student is, you know, not everyone is college bound. And on top of that, we have sort of inflated this 4-year degree, and it just becomes an easy thing to require instead of, you know, really asking ourselves, well, couldn't someone learn this, right? At some point, we all figured it out. We all learned it. And so we will be taking on 4 or 5 apprentices, and it's a big commitment. It is a 3-year commitment for the company and for the students. And hopefully at the end of it, you've either produced a really amazing talent for the market, or you convert them to a full-time hire or what have you. So we're trying to really look at talent from a bunch of different angles. And I think the other thing that does is it gets people in the organization. It sort of normalizes people that aren't like you and people whose experience is different than you. And really amazing things for a company and a culture and thinking about who and how we hire is just interesting, foundationally making those turns.
One of the things that really struck me about your talk, your DisruptHR talk, was just, I feel like your authenticity. I feel like you're your whole self when you're on stage, and I think that's a challenge right now for a lot of HR leaders is they don't feel like they can really be themselves because we're kind of in this weird space being in HR. Sometimes we have a dotted line to the executive team, but also to the board of directors. So it's kind of this weird space. What advice do you have for maybe listeners on how to just kind of be themselves at the organization and maybe find that right place that fits their, just the uniqueness of who they are?
Yeah, it is a weird place, this HR space. And I think, you know, my authenticity, I'm just not good at being two people. So for me personally, I don't know how else to show up. And that's certainly not, there are tons and tons of people that have a work person and a home person, and that works for a lot of people. I mean, I can only say for me, that kind of showing up as my whole self, one, it has certainly gotten me in trouble early in my career. Like, sometimes you can't be Kathleen on 11 all the time. Kathleen on 8 is just fine. And so, you know, I had to learn to sort of dial it back, truth be told. But how to show up that way, I think it really, for me, starts in the interview process of just showing up like yourself and not trying to put on some like uber professional, if that's not who you are, person. Like, just tell your story, because you don't want to wind up somewhere where you're not supposed to be anyway. You want to wind up where it works for everyone. So I think that's the first thing, is just showing up as yourself at the interview. And then one of the things that I don't think anybody does, whether it's an HR person or not, is ask for references of the people you're going to work for. Like, talk to people who work for and with CEO or VP of HR or whoever it is that you're going to be reporting to, and really understand who is that person. Because you certainly hope that they're being authentic in the interview as well, but it's a professional setting, and people do sort of dial themselves up or down depending on how they view themselves. I think that can be really, really helpful. I think it's also helpful to know who you are in the first place and do an inventory of like when, and I mean, I did that before I took this position, and this position sort of presented itself to me, was I really did an inventory of when had I been the happiest, when had I felt like I contributed the most, where did I stay the longest, and why. So I was very clear on what I was looking for and how I wanted to feel when I was at work. So I was able to convey those things and put those things into words. So part of being authentic is sort of to thine own self be true, right? Is you have to know yourself before you can let others know you too.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast with us today. Where can people go to learn more about you?
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, certainly my LinkedIn page is a really great place to start. I was actually just talking to my 17-year-old last week, and I was like, we're having a social media conversation, and I asked her if she had ever Googled herself, and she was like, no, who does that? And I was like, well, professional people should do it all the time, just to make sure of what's out there. So you certainly could Google my name, and a bunch of the Disrupt Talks will come up, and other things that I've written and done.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I know that people are going to listen to this podcast and really learn from it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was really fun to chat with you.
Are you an HR leader looking to upskill your HR game? Then check out Workology's Learn, an on-demand learning platform anytime, anywhere for individuals and teams. To learn more, visit workology.com/learn.
Confidence is attractive. Authenticity is attractive. I think these are intangibles that go beyond facial symmetry. Should unattractiveness be a protected class? We've explored that a number of cities have ordinances that are designed to protect against discrimination of certain physical characteristics, but beauty might be a tough one. I hope you enjoyed Kathleen's insights, and I do believe that attractiveness goes beyond skin deep, starting with a personal inventory and a lot of self-reflection. Thank you for listening to the Workology podcast. Have a great day.